Transportation Committee for Monday, April 23rd, 2018. And our first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next up is approval of minutes, and we'll take these one at a time. So first is for March 26, 2018. Are there any changes? Amendments?
Minutes from March 26th, Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next up is the April 9th, 2018 minutes.
I'll move those minutes, Madam Chair.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Next up is employee recognition, Metro Transit.
Yes, Madam Chair, members, I think the theme that you'll see throughout this is it takes many people to make a successful organization run on a daily basis. And that includes the operators behind the wheel, it includes the maintenance staff and who support the vehicles, but also the maintenance staff who really are there every single day, making the support facilities and the public facilities go, and we're going to talk about them as well. But the other part is our revenue operations and how important that is as well to the overall organization. So we have an individual we'd like to recognize. So I want to bring up Mary Campistrant and her to introduce Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. I'd like to present to you Tim Johnson. Tim started with Metro Transit back in 2013, where he became an operator, and within a year he joined the revenue operations staff as a service center representative. And he works both downtown Minneapolis as well as downtown St. Paul. Tim has been recognized, is being recognized for the leader that he is and has been over the years that he's worked with me and my staff. He's very quick-witted. And he has a good sense of humor, which goes very well with me, the people he works with, as well as the people that come into the service centers. Oftentimes, those are the people that need the most help. Tim has got a no worries kind of attitude. And when Brian said we didn't have a plaque here today, Tim's first response was, no worries. So he often helps people in ways that goes above and beyond his duties. He's taken classes for Spanish, so that on his time, so that he could better communicate with our customers. He does so many things, including we've known him to walk people down the street to the bus stop because they just didn't get it. So Tim's that kind of guy, and he also takes on the most challenging customers that may walk into our service centers for whatever reason, and everyone always looks to Tim to kind of handle those folks if need be. So Tim is always willing to do that little bit extra, like I said. He's taken the Leadership Essential classes to improve his skills. He's also works extra hours when I need him. He's reviewing our limited mobility program to improve that right now. And as well as he raised his hand when he found out I was training operators that were going from part-time to full-time. And because of his background as a driver, he thought they might be able to relate with them better than I can. And I think he's right. So he's helped out with that. Just what highlights him more than anything is here in January, my lead representative went out on medical leave. And again, Tim raised his hand to say, let me help out, let me take over some of those duties. And again, it's his ability to not sit still most of the time, but also to always want to do something a little more and learn a little more. So I'm just thrilled with him. So he has commitment in many areas and has great leadership skills. And I would like to recognize him today in front of the council and in front of the people here to say thank you for your work, what you do today and what you'll do tomorrow.
Madam Chair, you would maybe expect more out of a transportation company than being able to say somewhere we lost the plaques in transport. But Tim, we will catch up with Tim as well as our others at a later point with the plaque.
I still want to shake hands. Thank you very much. That doesn't work. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Members,
Yes.
Madam Chair, I saved a large group for last, but it's a very important group. And as you know, when you run a campus that has many facilities, it's really important that you are as cost effective in the operations as possible. And we've had many presentations over the years about how, for instance, our utility bills, we've been able to manage that through good investment. And that doesn't happen by accident. It really happens because we have an extremely proactive and very professional staff in our public facilities area. And so I'm going to bring up Mike Matteo, and he's going to introduce his team and explain how his team has worked so effectively together over the course of the last few years. So, Mike.
Madam Chair and committee members, General Manager Lamb, thank you so much for this opportunity today to draw attention to some very special individuals from our department. My name is Mike Matteo. I'm manager of facilities for Metro Transit. I oversee a few groups, but the group that I'm speaking with today here is a group of our electricians and building technicians who have worked to identify some cost-saving measures that have really resulted in some very substantial savings for the council, and I think are a pathline for where we'd like to go in the future with a lot of our facilities. So first to my right is our supervisor, Bob Picard. To his right is our master electrician, Rich Brown. Next to him is our electrician, Jim Davis. Next to him, our electrician, Joe Coran. Next to Joe is our electrician, John Miller. Or Ken, you can come up and you can get him. Ken Cummings, our building technician. Next to over here is our building technician, Scott Kaufman. And last but not least is our electrician, Gordy Cornier. So this group of individuals has been involved in a rather large-scale effort for the better part of about the last 4 months. An energy audit was conducted by Excel Energy and was done at the Overhaul Base facility, which is located in St. Paul. And that energy audit was basically on the premise from our general manager, Brian Lamb, as well as our director, Marilyn Porter, who unfortunately is sitting in back, but have both expressed upon us a desire to improve our costs for energy usage, as well as being good stewards of our community and the world we live in. So Bob and others have been involved in trying to identify some of these potential savings and some of these projects that could benefit us. And so Bob, along with others, met with Excel Energy in the Overhaul Base in May of 2017 and conducted a very site-specific audit where Excel, along with our guys, went through and identified areas in that building that could have substantial upgrades that would improve our energy efficiency. And the special part of that program was that by having Excel there with us to identify those areas of work, Excel was actually willing to help pay the cost of some of that work to encourage us to perform it. So Excel provided a rebate to us of just excess of $76,000 to help offset the cost of materials for this project. And once those materials were acquired, it was this group of individuals that spent about the next 4 months for over 600 man hours in installing both what we call steam traps, which I won't get into the specifics of what those are, but they're a way of regulating our heat in our building, that had been in failing repair. They actually, Ken himself had mapped out the location of 119 of them in our building, to which we didn't even exactly know what existed. So he went to great lengths to identify those and rebuild those. And beyond that steam trap project, we also identified the replacement of LED bulbs and LED fixtures in all of our lighting. And so all those costs combined, we'll see what we believe to be about a $43,000 a year benefit in reduced energy costs. And with the offset costs of the rebates from Excel, the entire program that we did with labor and materials will be fully paid for in savings in less than 2 years. And beyond that, it's permanent savings for us. Beyond the energy, we also are saving, we believe, about 164,000 gallons of water a year that we were losing lost steam in our building, which is incredibly significant. We could probably wash a lot of buses and a lot of trains with that much water. So I just really wanted to point out the work that these individuals had done, the actual savings that the Met Council will see and the benefit to our community by their hard work, their stewardship, and and their dedication to what we do every day. So I just want to thank them through this process, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain to you what these individuals did.
I promise.
Thank you, sir.
If I may.
Thank you.
So is that the last one? Okay, next up is the TAB Liaison Report. And Member Dudek, you
Yeah,
can.
thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, General Manager Lamb, and Director Thompson. I'm just glad I don't work for Metro Transit. I'd never keep my job. I'm not good enough. Geez, what a crew. Wow. Best part of the meeting. There are several items that I'd like to bring to your attention. First of all, that in June, at our TAB meeting, you're all invited to attend, Philip Schaffner from the MnDOT will update the TAB on the review of the project selection process for MnDOT. This is authorized or mandated by legislation passed about a year ago, and it reviews every program of MnDOT, bridge, roadway, repair, what have you, and is putting it together in a system to quantify the projects, rank them, much like we do in regional solicitation, and also to give transparency to the program. And an update on the scope change workshop, which is being headed by funding and programming, and that will be to determine whether scope changes need to be rescored or as it affects funding. More to come on that. From MnDOT, the Corridors of Commerce, which I know you're all familiar with, this is the first time in the Corridors of Commerce where they have used specific criteria, and that is on the MnDOT website. There are 8 criteria, and the last one, or the number 8, is geographical balance. And then out of this will come one list, which is now with the commissioner, I believe, and headed to the governor, will include all projects, whether metro or outstate. They will be ranked according to the criteria. And by way of numbers, there is $400 million allocated for this program, 200 for the metro, 200 for outstate. MnDOT received 172 projects for a total of $5.6 billion. And MnDOT also wanted us to know that they have used 35% of their more than 35% of their snow removal money by February than it used all last year, and that is not counting March and April. So I guess there'll be a budget crunch of some sort. And a quick update on the VW settlement. As you know, it is now final. It's going into the implementation stages. Because the offending VW vehicles were diesel, the money will be used to replace diesel vehicles. However, the fuel type that they're replaced with, whether it be propane, electric, natural gas, gasoline, they're not limited to having it to be diesel. And there is money also in the program for electric vehicle charging stations. Because 60% of the violating vehicles are in the metro, 60% of the settlement fund will come to the metro. And the first phase is 2018 and 19 of the $47 million. It will be $11.75 million. Over half of that will go to replacing school buses, heavy-duty trucks, that's class 4 to 8, and transit buses. And now we get on to MAC and their snow budget, and they maxed it out in mid-March. But on happier news, the Delta is replacing the MD-90s, which were rather loud. They're being replaced with a larger plane, and that means to be less need for takeoffs and landing, so reducing the noise. And you may notice, Carl Crimmins wanted us to know that when you're at the airport, you'll see that some gates are disappearing because the new aircraft are larger, so they're combining gates to give the planes access to the gateways. 2 items that are not on your agenda tonight. They're both scope changes. The first is in Councilmember Commerce District, and this was the Expo area safe routes to school. And Councilmember Tolbert of the city, who's a member of TAB and also a city council member from St. Paul, made a motion to keep the federal award, even though it was a scope change, and reduce the project somewhat at the 80% funding, because the bids had not gone out and it was expected that the bids would exceed the original award in any case. And Madam Chair had some comments on that, in that she was concerned that where we have a scope change and it perhaps reduces the project, but leaves the funding at the same level, how are we going to work with that? And that will be part of the scope change process. Madam Chair, is there anything that I left out from that?
No, I think you covered it. My concern was that there were these two scope changes, and basically what ended up, it's not a big dollar difference, it's 18,000 approximately for both changes, but they're basically have 18,000 now in their when they go out to the market, and so if the bid comes back as higher, then they're able to be at the higher amount. And those projects that don't have any scope changes, of course, don't have that luxury of having any cushion. And so I supported the business items, and they did pass unanimously, both of them, because we do have a working group that's looking at scope and having some kind of guidelines and consistency around it. So,
thank you, Madam Chair. And the second scope change is in Councilmember Barber's district in Dahlgren Township at the intersection of 212 and County State Aid Highway 36, as I said, in Dahlgren Township. And it's a reduced conflict interchange. And that is all by way of saying, I'm told it's a nickname, a Michigan U-turn. And it was funded by HSIP. And both projects, the scope changes were approved, but not to exceed the original amount. And just a quick update on HSIP. As you know, it's a federal program aimed at reducing fatalities and serious injuries, run by MnDOT, although the projects and funds were approved by TAB and included in the TIP. For 2022-23, there's $22.7 million allocated. 70% goes to reactive, so after the crashes occurred, fixing. 30% to proactive. Maximum federal award is 1.8, and then it goes up to 90%. And I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate the Metropolitan Council on its National Achievement Award for Planning, which Chair Rodriguez brought up at the TAB, a standing ovation, and in addition to the transit and wastewater. And I must apologize, I have to leave for another appointment, but thank you. Any questions?
are there any questions
And I
for
took
Member
too long.
Dugan?
Katie was giving me the, oh, sorry. Oh, look.
Thank you very much. Before I turn it over to reports, I wanted to comment on two things that happened in the last few weeks. I wanted to give a shout out to Metro Transit and especially our drivers for their incredible work in our historic blizzard last week, which it seems kind of crazy to be talking about it when it's so gorgeous outside. But it was really fun to read all the appreciative comments from our riders on social media. And I echo their kudos. My favorite was shout out to Metro Transit today, the real heroes of winter life. There were a lot of comments actually that called our drivers heroes, and it was nice to see. So I highly recommend that. I think Brian's going to share some more on that. In sharp contrast to all that respect, there were 2 driver assaults that were shared on social media in the last few weeks, and they're really distressing to watch. And my heart goes out to those drivers that were assaulted, but also all the drivers that have been shown disrespect. And both the chair and I have had meetings and phone calls with staff, and I am encouraged by their ongoing efforts to keep our drivers and our riders safe. But I have asked Brian to give us just a brief update today, because I know that we're going to get a more lengthy presentation on this later. But I did want to end. I just want to say a sincere thank you to all of our staff, especially our drivers and our police officers who go above and beyond every day. So, Brian.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. And before I get into some of the details associated with that, I also want to recognize that not only the Metro Transit operators, but the Metro Mobility operators, contract operators, everyone had a significant challenge last week getting through, and we'll go through the slide in just one second. But first, before I do, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the safety and security initiatives that we have in play, and we'll definitely be bringing forward to council members for your review and comment, because we think that this is a multifaceted issue that we're facing. In some cases, obviously, we need to make sure that we have highly visible, effective enforcement approach towards making sure that we understand through predictive analytics where we might most likely have problems, and make sure that we're positioning staff, because we won't have in any scenario enough staff at any one time to be able to address and prevent all approaches. But we think that both from a on-vehicle perspective, but also understanding and being able to position ourselves at certain locations to allow quick response, but also prevention, is one area that we're going to really spend some additional investment in. A second area, though, is to make sure that we're equipping our operators with both the physical protections, but also the techniques that might be able to de-escalate situations before they get out of hand. And we know that oftentimes that can be the difference between a confrontation that is being able to kind of be contained versus one that might get out of hand. And so we have committed an extensive investment towards a red kite program. You might have heard that term before, but we'll talk a little bit about that. Is a training program that the SEPTA Philadelphia system is used quite effectively in the last few years, and their operators have really found that to be a very effective tool. So that's another aspect of this. The third, of course, is the physical protection. And as you know, we have a pilot in place with 22 physical barriers, and we're evaluating that with a management labor team, looking at the pros and cons of both the individual design, but also how effective it is in terms of being able to kind of find that right balance between being customer focused and accessible, but also to be safe. And those are a couple of the highlights, but we definitely think that we have a very proactive approach, and I shouldn't finish this element without saying we also recognize that some of the larger societal issues, particularly the homelessness issue, is one that we are wrestling with and trying to find both a partner-oriented way to help mitigate, but also we need to recognize that we have ongoing issues in terms of particularly overnight on some of our support lines that we need to kind of address as a council and as staff. So we want to bring that forward as well. So with that being said, I do want to, if I could, recognize that given our current weather, that many of us probably put this once blizzard behind us. But customers who relied on us to get to our destinations during winter's final stand won't soon forget the effort of those operators that Chair Rodriguez mentioned earlier. And here are a few images captured during the storm and a sampling of the positive feedback that we heard from our riders.
Madam Chair, if I may,
General Manager Lamb, yes.
I want to touch on something before we go on to the blizzard with regards to the pilot project that you're doing now. Do we have an expected time frame? How long it's going to be? What kind of barriers are going to be provided? Because I know spit shields are different than the full barriers.
Madam Chair, in answer to Councilmember Reynoso's point, we wanted to have a full 6-month period of where there's at least 4 vehicles in every bus garage. We've tried to assign those vehicles to the garages and where we believe we were going to have the most potential for conflict. And so that's part of what, and as management and labor have agreed that we're going to evaluate that, plus an area of related issue, which is kind of our parking lot related safety, so that when they're off duty, how do they safely get to their cars and those kinds of things, because we have a 24/7 operation. So it's 6 months in duration. We don't have, there aren't, I'll say, an endless different set of designs that will work with our physical. We have two primary bus types, the Gillick bus as well as the New Flyer bus. And so there's a few that have been actually one design that Gillick has fully endorsed, and we have that piece. But we've had some independent manufacturers come forward and say that they also have an alternative design that they're willing for, are interested in us to explore. So we'd like to be able to give a few different designs. I'll say part of the test, and I don't think this will be essentially a one and done kind of thing, as we'll continue to try to refine that.
Just to follow up, Madam Chair, and to the
Councilmember
extent,
Noso.
what kind of data is, it's a pilot project. What kind of data are we looking for? Obviously, input from the community is important, but I think input from the driver and how safe they feel in performing their job is the utmost importance. So, what other type of data
Yeah.
will we be?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Reynoso, those are exactly two key, but we also want to see whether there is a reduction in any sort of, whether it's verbal all the way through, and we do stratify the types of assaults that our operators are subject to. So we want to be able to also look at quantification, not just, I'll say, reactions in terms of inputs. Now, I will say that while some have found it to be already one of those enhancements, others, have found it to be confining, and other, reactions. So we want to be mindful to all of that input before we make any final determinations.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dorfman.
Thank you. So, Brian, you talked about two issues. One, the security issues and how we're going to move forward, and then a separate issue, the issue around people who are experiencing homelessness, who are using transit facilities for shelter because they often have no alternative. Those are separate issues. We often find that folks who experience a homeless are pretty vulnerable themselves and often the victim of crime. So on the homeless side of it, we understand sort of how we're moving forward in testing solutions around the security, and the training I think is really important. It's tough. You're in a lot of the de-escalation training talks about space and how the drivers don't have much space. They're kind of in a trapped area. When will we hear sort of what you're considering in terms of addressing issues around homelessness and use of the trains and buses?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, actually, I'm hoping that we can schedule a committee of the whole briefing in terms of our major initiatives and some level of specificity behind those initiatives in the month of May. But the understanding, of course, and I want to just highlight the point you just made with homelessness. This is not like something that we can lift by ourselves. We continue to need to make sure that we are working collaboratively with the social service as well as other public jurisdictions. So I wouldn't expect, I'll say, a year-end significant ending to this project, but rather sets us in a direction that I hope that the council can support, as well as the community in which we serve.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, Brian, I saw both of the videos of the assaults, and it appears to me that there was no time for de-escalation. Both of the assaults were unprovoked and really brutal. I'm wondering in those situations if our drivers, as a matter of policy, are empowered to call the control center to reach out for immediate help before they get the crap kicked out of them.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Munt, you're absolutely right. And when we're talking about de-escalation, we recognize that not every situation lends itself to that, but some do. And when you're talking about kind of putting together a puzzle of being able to have tools available to you, whether they're the technological, the physical support tools, but also the human emotion tools, that's the fabric that we think is important, that all kind of gets rolled up to a greater whole. So I'm not pretending that this one, particularly the first one that you saw, situation was preventable in any sort of a de-escalation. But giving that training we think is important for all of our operators. Having said that, there are technology ways that an operator can quickly receive help. And one of the things that we owe you is kind of how quickly that help arrives. And during that presentation, we will certainly talk about response time for different gradations of activity that an operator might be calling about. But an emergency situation is all hands on deck, and we will respond as quickly as possible.
Are there any further questions or comments?
Having said that, Madam Chair, let me move back to kind of the blizzard that we'd all like to forget, and a couple of different pictures of what went on during the weekend. And I don't know, you can kind of see this. At one point, and this is not all that uncommon during a heavy snowstorm, you see the people in the back of the bus. A few bodies can make a big difference in getting you through that one stuck situation. And at one point during Saturday's height of the storm, we had dozens of buses stuck. And this continues on now. This is a few of the comments to your point, Madam Chair, social media, as well as people calling in and customer relations. And so with that, Madam Chair, let me say two other quick things. I apologize for the length of this report. One is that earlier this year, I'm pleased to report that we had another historically low number of bus accidents last year. And when you think about the relatively lack of seniority that we have in our overall workforce, that's an incredible accomplishment. And so APTA, the American Public Transit Association, has acknowledged us with a Certificate of Merit because of that performance this last year. And then lastly, I want to remind council members that if you are so interested, the Commuter Choice Awards will be held this Thursday, April 26th in Minneapolis. And you're more than welcome to come, because this is a great opportunity to listen to how businesses and individuals really believe in the meaning of commuterism, if that's a word. Doesn't have to be driving in a single occupancy vehicle, and you see a lot of, I think, really innovative approaches. So it's, I think, a very uplifting experience. More details on that, if you want to know more, I'll be happy to provide that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any further questions from committee members? I know I plan to attend. MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair and members, following up on General Manager Lamb's comments about the storm, and since First Transit and Transit team are in the audience, I'd like to extend our thanks for their work last weekend, getting the Metro Mobility customers where they could. We reported no injuries, no accidents. Customers, I'd like to thank them too. They made calls to all the scheduled trips and asked if any would like to cancel. That made it a lot easier for that weekend, but it was quite a tough weekend, and thanks to all for that. We are getting close to opening the regional solicitation application to submitters. We've completed we're right in the testing mode, wrapping that up. We've completed the workshops. I anticipate that maybe before this committee meets again, it will be open to those who are going to submit applications, and they'll be due by July 13th. Another item today, we mailed over 3,000 letters to the general public, inviting them to be part of our test of the travel behavior inventory survey test. And what we're doing now is pre-test, where we're trying to get 400 random sample households to be part of the test before we roll out the large test this fall. And that'll be the test of the app, and that you've seen that before this committee. I have not given an update on MVEST in a while to this committee, partly because of the problems the system was having, but I can, at management this week, they'll be reporting the 2017 MVEST, and it ended with MVEST coming in at 96% of the 2017 forecast. And as you know, we budget at 95% of forecast and carry forward any extra the following year. So with those 27 actuals, it doesn't allow us to carry forward too much into 2018, but we'll start getting some more general reports. I think the system is fairly stable now for that. And as Member Dugan had mentioned, Quarters of Commerce, I'm anticipating the announcement any day now on which projects were selected. We plan to come before this committee as a larger to talk about what was funded, and we also have to allocate $150 million of other money to major projects that are tied to Quarters of Commerce. But once that's announced, I'll send that announcement, and then we'll have a fuller brief before this committee in one of the next few meetings. With that, Madam Chair, that concludes my report, and I will stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Director Thompson? No? Okay. As we move on to the business portion of our agenda, I just want to explain we have several people signed up to speak to address the first non-consent business item. So we can go ahead and vote on our consent agenda, but then we will have speakers for the non-consent. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved. Next up is non-consent is 2018-86. It's the same week item, and it's the agency contracts for 2018-2023. And the first person we have signed up, and if the presenters could keep their comments to under 3 minutes, please. And I apologize ahead of time if I don't say your name correctly, so please correct me when you get up to the podium. But it's Trista Masticala-Castillo. Sorry. Representing the Teamsters and Metro Mobility.
Yes. Hi, it's Trista Mattis Castillo, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
It's all right. I actually am here today to speak to you as a mother of a child with disabilities who uses Metro Mobility and a representative of the disabilities community. And so when we learned of this information, and I'm sorry if I get emotional, I will just tell you this is really personal. And so let me just tell you about my son, Hunter, briefly. Hunter is 18 years old, so he's an adult with severe cognitive and developmental disabilities who has been socially isolated for most of his life because of his disabilities. He has recently moved into a group home, improving the quality of his life. But the only way that he is allowed to leave the group home with a PCA is when he uses Metro Mobility. And we've used other services, we've used private drivers, we've used the school bus to take him to and from school, but because of his behavioral and cognitive developmental disabilities, it's very difficult. And his number one trigger is when there's change, transition, and that includes change of drivers. But because he's now in a group home and he has a regular scheduled driver that takes him to and from school, he has improved his quality of life so dramatically. And it's quite remarkable to see how he has begun to thrive and connect with other people. And so, along with my other members of the disabilities community, the concern of change so drastically, with a bottom dollar being the biggest number one contributing factor, is very alarming and disturbing, because we know that consistency, and in fact your own task force concluded that consistency and continuity of drivers and driver care is the number one quality of life factor for your customers. And so I'm here to plead with you to say that whatever you do, that we keep our drivers employed, and that consistency is vitally important for the quality of service so that people and members in the disabilities community truly can thrive and go on. And our drivers have become part of our family. We know our driver well. He comes to pick him up for school and bring him home, and he knows Hunter and knows his abilities and disabilities. And so it really is a personal factor. And at the end of the day, the bottom dollar, yes, it's important, but it's even more important that we are taking care of the human factor, which is truly priceless. So I just urge you to reconsider and to think about that and to make sure that we're keeping our drivers employed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have John Matthews and Tim Ogren representing First Transit. Welcome to the committee.
Madam Chair, council members, I just wanted to thank the procurement department. We are following the procurement process in addressing the issues that we have. We have found a number of concerns in dealing with the RFP that was released and the recommendation that was brought forth not too long ago. Those concerns are being dealt with, as I say, through your procurement department, and we'll continue to work with them. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. The concerns basically are around the cost factors and some of the evaluations that were done under the procurement process. In fact, if you look at number 3, which is the review of highlights on the document that was handed out today, you will notice that the proposed increases as to one of the reasons for the recommendation is because our competitor was significantly lower in price than we were. That's difficult for us to completely understand because we don't have access to that information, but we believe there's a number of reasons why that took place. The first reason is that when you look at what came out with the RFP, typically what you would get were the addresses of people and the agency address, so you could route all the rides so that you could deliver people in the most effective way in order to get them to their agency and then back home again. Instead, we were not given the addresses, we were simply given zip codes. Zip codes, the problem with that is that there's up to a 30% difference from one end of a zip code to another in miles, and 40 to 50% in these particular agencies when it comes to driver hours. Since the deadhead from your base to the first pickup is not paid for, you have to cover that through deadhead hours and miles. The only way you could significantly pay your drivers the same amount of money as I'm paying my drivers would be to somehow not get the number right for the number of deadhead hours and miles. Neither us nor our competitor, the finalists, had access to that information at the time. There's a remedy to that. We could go in and and there's a reason that happened was certainly a good reason because of HIPAA regulations. Giving out that information could create a problem. So we understand why that might not have been given out. We don't understand or one of the recommendations we would make is allow us and our competitors to come in and actually route the work on controlled computers here at the Met Council so we know what the facts are, and then adjust if our facts are off on how we presented our bid to allow fairness. The way you can kind of tell that this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, at least in my mind, is that if you look again at the rates that were given to I'm assuming everybody here, and to the people that are making the decision on who to choose. If you look at demand east, it's 44.31, demand south 44.31, demand west 46.31, and agency 47.74. The first two numbers, 44.31 and 44.31, demand east and south, are run by First Transit. Those numbers are old numbers. They're accurate, but they're very old. Then the numbers we're actually running today are 48.01, and the actual numbers for demand west today are not 46.31, but rather 50.01. And the reason for that is because the Met Council gave us an increase so we could pay our drivers a minimum of $16 an hour, which did increase that. So that becomes very important because when you're comparing an old rate to new rates, it would look like the rate of 47.74 might be reasonable to provide transportation. But if you notice, right now our current agency rate is 53.65, which is higher than my competitor, who is high in his agency work, who is higher than me in my demand work. He's higher than me in my demand work, and I'm higher than him in agency costs right now, which makes sense because of the deadhead. You have to do the deadhead twice a day in agency, and you only do deadhead for the most part once a day in demand. So the odds of the number being less than what it currently costs us to run this work either suggest that we have a way too high of cost or that perhaps there's some other numbers that are inaccurate. Our assertion would be is that needs to be examined a lot more closely in order to make a decision so that, first of all, that whomever you end up choosing, that you choose somebody that can deliver at the deliver good quality service at the pricing that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Mike Richter from Transit Team.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Mike Richter. I'm the president and owner of Transit Team. We were really excited to find out that we were selected to be the new provider of Metro Mobility Agency service. We're here again to reiterate why we understood all the information that was provided to us in the RFP process and why we are the logical provider to provide this service going forward. To John's point, yes, zip codes were what was provided to us to make our determination on deadhead, but it was the same information for all providers. And that is enough information for us to understand where, in general, those clients are going to be going to and from. We were able to use that analysis to understand what our deadhead was going to be. We do understand that there are 2 deadheads, AM and PM deadheads. We are currently operating split shift routes, very similar to what we're operating on our demand service, and we understand what that labor cost is. While there might be a greater deadhead amount in this agency contract because we're not maybe picking people up quite as near to our base, we do understand and did take that into account when bidding our contract. I want to remind the Transportation Committee again, this is a new contract. This isn't the existing agency contract as it has been for the last 15 years. It has been reduced to more or less reflect the ADA service area. It is service that we're already currently providing on demand service near a 20% level. And so we do understand kind of the deadhead aspects and kind of where these clients are going to and from. I also want to address the fact that we do have 2 facilities. We have 2 locations, one of those being right outside of downtown Minneapolis, which puts us in a central location to a lot of these agencies, which gives us an advantage over our competitors. We are able to, for a lot of these clientele and clients, able to reduce that deadhead in combination with our Maple Grove facility, which allows us to access and minimize deadhead to some of the western and northwestern clients who use the service. We are experienced. We've been providing paratransit service and Metro Mobility service in particular for 30 years. We were providing the agency service 15 years ago prior to First Transit. We understand the nature of the service. We understand that it is important to have consistency among drivers. We get that. It's very, very important, and it's something that we believe in. As a part of our bid and as our part of our process, we have agreed to try to hire as many of the First Transit drivers to kind of smooth that transition and make sure we do maintain as much consistency as possible. But I do want to remind everybody that it is a new contract, and so while there is consistency for some riders, it is a new service for others. And so I'm not sure how much consistency there or what type of argument or how big of an argument you can make for that consistency because it is a new contract. There's likely going to be new providers for all customers going to or from the new agencies that are on this contract. We take care of our people. We're a local business. We take pride in our business. We treat our employees the way that we would want to be treated. We provide benefits that exceed the market. We provide free life insurance to our employees. All of our drivers are eligible for a full $1 of increase for every year of service with no cap. Current drivers making $31 an hour. We provide free turkeys every year for Thanksgiving. We do drivers appreciation days and holiday parties with monetary bonuses and drawings for prizes. We cater Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner for the people who have to be working on those days. There are a lot of things that we could do to cut costs, but treating our employees in a respectful way, the way that we would want to be treated if roles were reversed, is something that's really, truly important to us. So my wife, Stacy, and I are the owners. We are the stakeholders. We're committed. As a provider of Metro Mobility service, as a contracted provider, this is the majority of our business. This is our livelihood. We have skin in the game. If we don't succeed, there's nothing. So you're looking at the decision maker. You're looking at the people who care day in and day out to make sure that we're providing valuable service, not only to the council, but to also the clients of Metro Mobility. One last point that I want to make is that we're local. We have a facility in Minneapolis and Maple Grove. We're committed quite literally to the Twin Cities area. All of our payroll dollars stay here local. Work with local vendors whenever possible. Any taxes from profits of the company get paid at Minnesota income tax rates. Taxpayer dollars are staying here local, and not every MTS contractor can say the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Paul Slattery from the Teamsters.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. At today's Met Council Transportation meeting, we'll be discussing non-consent item number 2018-86S, the Metro Mobility Agency contract. If this item is recommended, the disabled community that is currently being served will be devastated. Driver continuity is the #1 issue within this community. First Transit has serviced this community for 15 years. 13 of the First Transit drivers have 10 or more years of service with the company, and 5 of their drivers have worked there for over 15 years or more, serving the disabled community. These drivers will be devastated by the proposed contract and face layoffs from employment and other negative impacts on their lives. Teamsters Local 120 represents First Transit drivers under a collective bargaining agreement. Transit Team is a non-union company, and their employees are at will, which means they have no guarantee of employment. This is the only way that Transit Team could have underbid First Transit for the agency contract. Our dedicated First Transit drivers and the clients who rely upon them should not have to suffer because Transit Team does not want to pay union wages and benefits. The only way this can be a fair and transparent process is for Transit Team to accept the First Transit drivers and their collective bargaining agreement. Then you and the disabled community served by Metro Mobility can be assured that the clients can keep their drivers and the drivers can keep their pay and benefit package. Now, Transit Team is on record saying they pay their drivers more than union drivers, and they give their drivers $1 per hour annual pay increases. And if this is true, how could their bid be less? Where are the efficiencies coming from, if not in labor costs? And I'll open up to any questions you guys might have of me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, I'm sorry. Wiedebrand.
I have a tough time.
The Teamsters.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome to the committee.
Council members. I'm Bill Wiedebrand, Secretary Treasurer of Teamsters Local 120. We represent First Transit. I've personally negotiated the contract for First Transit. We take great pride in our First Transit members. Our members are devastated as well as we are. Our members do this job not for so much the money, but because of the passion they have for their members or for their clients. I think it's very important that is heard. I think it's very important that this contract for these people don't go away. The First Transit Team put on record that once again they pay their employees $1 an hour for every year. You know what? If they were to get that needs to be in writing, because you know what? Let's prove it. They've also put on record that they give life insurance. Well, on this collective bargaining agreement, they not only get health insurance, they get paid time off, they get vacation, they get all kinds of benefits per our contract, per the collective bargaining agreement, that I have not heard one word on the Transit Team employees getting any kind of vacation or time off or anything like that. It's very important. This contract's been around for a long time. Our members, the most senior member affected today, or if this happens, is 19 years. 19 years, and I counted the top 30 people have 5 or more years of service. They do it because they love the work. I believe that if this goes to Transit Team, and Transit Team put on record, and we all know it, this is a new contract, that this contract should follow along with that. I totally disagree with the Transit Team statement that they'll hire 50% or more. No, they should hire every single one. They all know how to do the work. They've all been vetted. They've all went through their background checks. They should be hired with their full wages, with their full contractual benefits, and we'll go from there. I thank you very much for your time, and I sure hope you take in consideration the hard work that these First Transit employees have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Bobby Casper from St. Paul Regional Labor Federation. Welcome to the committee.
Welcome. Madam Chair, Met Council, my name is Bobby Casper. I'm the president of the St. Paul Regional Labor Federation, representing approximately 175 unions in the 4-county area: Chisago County, Washington County, Ramsey County, Dakota County. We are here today to question the council, and why are you allowing non-union contractors to come into the Met Council and underbid our union contractors? Is this supposed to be a union town? Aren't we? Most of the people on this board have come out of unions. It doesn't make any sense to me. Then when I see where the numbers are, I have a question about that. If a non-union contractor wins a bid, they should have union drivers go to work for them. There's no guarantees. You understand at will. You know what that does? Most of the Met Council know what that means? At will. You know the state employees? Everybody works for the state, the county. They're at will. You know that? So if the Met Council is going to be putting this stuff out and put contractors out, it's not at will. It's all at will. Why should a driver lose his safety and security? This contract's been around for 15 years. The health insurance, everything else. Now your life's uplifted. There's no guarantee. The union contract should go with the bid. If you recognize them, it should go along with them. Is the only council's interpretation is just on money? You just heard about what happened to these drivers earlier. They're great, dedicated workers. Okay? And so are these First Transit drivers. They take a lot of heart. But she talked about her son. I mean, that relationship, you're going to lose it all. So the only thing I'll tell you is this. This is a quality of life state. I've said this once before in another meeting. If you really recognize this stuff, you'd really pay attention to this. This company's been around 15 years. I have a real question about how these numbers are so off, and they're saying they're guaranteeing they're going to be paying these people more money. And is there going to be consideration of a contract? Are you going to be able to grieve it if there's a problem, or if something happens to them on the bus, like you're doing with the ATU? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Director Thompson to introduce the business item, but first I want to just address some of the comments. As much as I personally believe in unions, the council doesn't have a policy preference for union labor as part of our procurement process. Therefore, it cannot be a criteria in council procurements, and it is not relevant to our decision today. So, Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, members, thank you. Christine Kinnan, Senior Manager of Metro Mobility, and Jody Jacoby from Procurement will give a presentation tonight about this business item. But we thought, based on the questions we received at the last Transportation Committee, questions we've heard, that we should step back and really describe this agency contract and how it's different and what is changing in this, because we really are going through a pretty big change. We've reorganized this contract this service model after 20 years. And it's one that, no matter who would win this, we've heard a lot about the driver. Driver is very important to the customers. And we knew going into this reorganization that whoever would win this bid, we're going to have quite a bit of changes in drivers. This because we're changing the geography, changing which agencies are part of this. And so we wanted to describe that process and why we did that before we get into the steps that we did in evaluating the procurement. And then, of course, open any questions. But we'd like to step back and just kind of give an overview first, and then the procurement, and then get into the recommendation of what we have for this procurement. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine and Jody.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having me again. So I'm Christine Kennan. I'm the Senior Manager of Metro Mobility. I'm Jody Jacoby. I work in procurement, and I'm the Contracts Manager. So I'll begin by, as Director Thompson described, stepping back and giving you an overall picture of the agency service, Metro, and how it fits in with the overall Metro Mobility service. So Metro Mobility is comprised of 4 major contracts. So the map on this slide is a map of the 3 demand contracts and how we've divided it into 3 zones: East Zone, South Zone, and West Zone. First Transit holds a current contract for East Zone and South Zone, and Transit Team holds the contract for West Zone. the map of agency services on the next slide, so I'll get into that in a minute. All riders in Metro Mobility System are ADA certified. They all go through the same evaluation process and are certified for Metro Mobility service. Agency contract is 100% standing orders to and from the largest day training and habilitation centers and adult daycares in the metro area, as we've determined through our analysis. The agency contract is about 18% of all Metro Mobility rides. Agency service is different from demand, and that the demand system has a mix of both rides that are scheduled with standing order and rides that must be requested 1 to 4 days in advance. Many of our agency customers are also served by our demand system. For example, a customer might ride agency service to LifeWorks program during the week and also use the demand service to go to church, medical appointments, or social events. Currently, if you include all 3 demand contracts and the agency service, the provision is split with about 60% of our service provided by First Transit and 40% of the service provided by Transit Team. With the next agency contract being awarded to Transit Team, if that were awarded, it would be about 50% and 50%. So what is changing? The current contract serves over 20 adult day training habilitation centers and adult day activity centers in both the ADA and the non-ADA service areas throughout the Metro Mobility Service region. However, in particular, due to the constraints caused by the system growth, the FTA has recently identified a need for us to prioritize our ADA service over our non-ADA rides. One example of this, of our prioritizing this, was back in 2016, we had to begin limiting non-ADA standing orders and also had to begin denying non-ADA rides. This was in order to protect the service quality requirements mandated by federal law for the ADA-defined service area. The agency contract, by contrast, has been structured to serve all riders with standing orders. And as mentioned, the current contract provides service to agencies in both the ADA and non-ADA service areas. So in effect, this offers all agency customers in the non-ADA area a guarantee of service that does not exist on the demand system. That goes against our mandate to prioritize ADA service, and so therefore we did some restructuring. So primarily due to those federal requirements, we've restructured the scope of work in the new agency contract to include only those agencies that are within the ADA service area. We also took the opportunity to analyze our trip volumes to all agencies served in our system and have removed some smaller agencies from the scope of work for purposes of service efficiency. We also added 4 larger agencies that were within our ADA area that had not been part of the previous scope of the agency contract. It was important for us to do this analysis to try and keep the volume of work roughly equal to the old contract, but still serving the largest of areas that are within our ADA service footprint. We also included language in the contract that allows the council to vary the locations served during the contract term, allowing us maximum flexibility to appropriately serve agency needs. So why make the changes? I mentioned the federal compliance in the previous slide. I want to just assure everyone again that all riders served by the agency contract will be classified as ADA trips according to the FTA. All riders will still be provided Metro Mobility service. It's just that some customers who are part of agencies that are being that have been dropped from the scope of services will be provided service by the demand contract. "57% of current agency customers will be going to demand service, and existing routes will undergo extensive changes because of the changes in the location served." So again, as stated earlier, with this change, regardless of who has the new contract, there will be a short-term disruption to our customers. As Director Thompson stated, we were aware of this going in. We met with our agencies affected in November and December of this last year, and our transition plan includes multiple agencies and working with stakeholders to assist us with that transition, as well as closely with our providers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jody for the process that was done. Thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, this was a negotiated procurement, a request for proposal, where the evaluation criteria included 3 technical ratings: quality, which is the overall quality of the proposal, specifically completeness in addressing the requirements, the scope of work, the work plan and the schedule, qualifications, which includes general and specialized qualifications for delivering the service, competence in relation to the service, and successful completion of similar projects. Also, experience with council projects or other government agencies, including references. And then the final category is financial, where price is of equal in importance to the other technical criteria. One unique qualifier with this RFP is it included a base rate for which drivers need to have a starting wage of $16 per hour. All three proposals submitted complied with this requirement. Now, the council evaluation panels don't assign numeric values or points to scoring. Rather, we use qualitative evaluation criteria that includes the rating of excellent, very good, good, marginal, or unsatisfactory. To give you a better idea of the procurement timeline, let you know that the RFP was issued on January 18th. There were 12 plan holders or firms that downloaded the RFP. A pre-proposal conference was held on January 30th. While it wasn't mandatory to attend, all three firms that submitted proposals attended and included information about the procurement to help them be responsible. And it also included information from the project manager about the details of the service and the scope and the expectation. During the procurement process, 2 addendum were issued. There were 36 questions asked, and there was a written response to all 36 questions. The proposals were due on February 26th. We received 3 proposals from Transit Team, First Transit, and Metropolitan Transportation Network. The evaluation panel for this procurement included Metro Mobility staff, Metro Transit staff, and 3 external partners, which is an additional external partner more than what's required by council procedure. Those partners were from MnDOT, the Office of Transit, Council on Disabilities, and Dakota County. Additionally, because of the size of the project, there was a representative from finance, and their responsibility was to review the financial strength of the proposers to assess the company's health and then review the cost proposals that were submitted with the proposals. Procurement trained the evaluation panel on March 1st, and they trained the panelists on reviewing the guidelines for negotiated procurement, which is the Bible, as we call it, for the procurement process. They also signed confidentiality and disclosure forms, conflict of interest forms, statement of economic interest forms. They distributed the scope of work. They distributed the evaluation factors, both addendum, and they gave them individual evaluator worksheets. So after the training, they broke up for 2 weeks and they got back together for the first consensus meeting on March 15th. And after that meeting, they requested clarifications from all 3 proposers. They requested clarifications to further explain the staffing, the retention plans, the service delivery plans, driver wages, and costing. The committee convened on March 21st and reviewed that information and then reached consensus to recommend a contract to Transit Team as the firm that had the highest technical rating, the strongest financial position, and the lowest price offered. And the difference for pricing between the highest cost proposal and the lowest was $5.7 million.
Can I interrupt with a question? I just want to confirm then, because you heard some of our speakers say that the recommendation was just based on the proposal's price, but it was also true that the summary of the technical categories, that Transit Team was the highest ranking as well, correct?
Madam Chair, that's correct. Transit received the highest technical rating of Very Good Plus.
Thank you. Councilmember Latowski.
You want us to be asking questions as this is going on, or
You-
hold
Of,
them?
of course.
Okay, I'll jump in then on the procurement, although I have one for Christine too. What is our legal obligation around these procurements? Or another way to ask it is, what is the choice in front of us? If we don't approve the staff proposal, it's not like we get to choose another one, right? Is it we throw out all the bids and rebid it?
Jody.
If somebody could kind of clarify
You want me to bring
the
legal
legal
counsel up?
situation that we're in.
Anne, could you address that? Thank you.
Madam Chair, council member, there are situations where the council can vote to reject all bids and then rebid a procurement, but you have to have a sound business reason for doing so, and not simply that you would like to redo a procurement or potentially come out with another outcome. So the option today is really to either vote in favor of the staff's recommendation or vote against the staff's recommendation and send the matter to the council without a recommendation to award it to transit team.
Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, I respect our staff who have been involved in the RFP process, but I don't think any of us on this council want to be responsible for awarding a contract where 100 dedicated drivers are laid off. And I don't think we want to be responsible for approving a contract that achieves cost savings on the backs of those dedicated drivers. To me, there's a really easy solution today, and that is to ask the folks from Transit Team. I know that Mike and Stacy Richter care deeply about drivers and about our passengers. If in fact the pay is the same for those drivers, whether they work for First Transit or Transit Team, then Mike should accept these 100 drivers, accept the terms of their contract, and agree to not interfere if the balance of his workforce chooses to join the union.
I believe that request is outside of our decision today. Our decision today is to look at the staff recommendation on a legal procurement and to either recommend to the council to go with the staff recommendation, which would be awarded the contract to transit team, or not. But if you're not going to recommend, then you're going to have to make the business case based on the technical criteria and financial criteria that was laid out in the procurement. Councilmember Lunt.
Madam Chair, what I'm suggesting is a goodwill gesture on behalf of a vendor who I know cares about drivers and passengers.
Are there further questions? Councilmember McCarthy.
Madam Chair, there was going into this, I had two concerns. One is how it impacts our customers. Just this weekend, I was at a retirement event and I ran across one of our constituents in one of my cities of Roseville, and she was talking very highly about the service she receives. She's 92 years old, and 92 years old, living alone in her home, and the way she's able to do that was because of the service. And she talked about the drivers and how important it was to her to get from one area to another, and how kind and respectful and how consistent these drivers were. And so that is one issue. I do know you mentioned that service would be changing a little bit. And the other issue was the impact of our drivers. And as a public agency, we need to minimize the impact to our workers or to workers in general. And here you're talking about workers, 100 plus workers who will be basically laid off. I do know from looking over the last committee meeting was that they had mentioned that they'd be willing to retain at least 50% of the drivers. And so what precludes us from, rather than saying 50%, what precludes us from asking them to, accept all the drivers and then possibly, accept them all, the current drivers, and then possibly, um, you know, giving some kind of probationary period in order to determine whether or not those drivers are going through the process again from the last committee's notes, going through the process, of application. I mean, you can't determine whether or not a driver is a good driver from that application process. Obviously, these people have been vetted, and so you save costs in that way. So they've been vetted, they've been consistent drivers. So why can they not, agree to hiring everybody and giving them some kind of probationary period? This is done many a times. You do either a 90-day probationary period or a 6-month probationary period, and that gives that company the ability to weed out the drivers that aren't performing.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the questions that I have with this and some of the discussion that's going on is currently, as it was presented, 50% of the service is moving from agency to demand service. That demand service is split between different providers, partially First Transit, partially Transit Team. So a large percentage of these riders will be going to that. My guess is as far as wages and labor costs, that's accounting for a lot of the change in the agency contract itself. Then additionally, transit team itself, to be able to provide the agency service, may not need as many drivers because there are not as many sites. There are 15 sites less. They're a little more centralized. And so I believe the deadhead distance was talked about. That should be significantly less, and it should be a more efficient service. Our staff looked really closely at how this would be structured to improve the efficiencies in the system. And I think we need to consider that and keep that in mind as we're having these discussions.
Thank you. Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if we could hear from Mike Richter about whether or not he could hire 100 of the drivers, honor their contract, and not interfere if the rest of his workforce chose to join a union. I appreciate that he's in the audience today.
So I want to be really clear about what's before us today. Before us today is we have gone through a procurement process. We've had a proposal from companies. We had an evaluation panel that had outside evaluators, and they've made a recommendation, which we are considering today. We are not here to tell any of the companies how to do that business. That's not appropriate to our discussion today. Our discussion today is based on evaluating these proposers, evaluating the staff recommendation, asking questions about it, but making recommendations for a company that we're contracting with to run their business is outside of our lane. So can you, Councilmember Dorfman?
Now, question, if we look at the system as a whole, what is the situation with drivers in terms of, I mean, do we have a glut of drivers and all of the companies have too many, or is there a shortage system-wide, or do we have just the right number right now?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, I don't think there's a transit provider around that can say that we have a glut of drivers. I think every provider is looking to hire, and the attrition is such that they're constantly hiring, constantly training. The motion to increase the minimum driver wage in October of last year to $16 an hour has really helped with that. And at an update coming up this summer, I'd like to talk more deeply about what we've seen, but we have seen increased class sizes, increased retention, lower complaints, just in general by the provision of the $16 an hour. So, and I just want to comment that, certainly there is when the panel reviewed the proposals, the ability for the proposer to attract and retain the workforce needed to provide the service was considered. And as Jody spoke, some of the clarifying questions were around that.
Thank you. If there aren't further questions, you can go on with your presentation.
Sure. So I wanted to talk about the transition that we would plan now. So we're coming on the end of April, and so we'd want to move very quickly to a transition to make sure that we have the personnel needed to serve the new contract and beginning October 1st. So what that looks like is that beginning in May, the provider would be the transit team would initiate their transition of qualified incumbent drivers. And what I heard was, and what was written in the proposal was that there would be a recruitment and working with the incumbent to transition as many drivers as possible. The proposal estimated that at least, based on their past experience with transitions, that at least 50% of the workforce would transition. And then they went on to talk about the hourly rate and their retention strategies. So that would include the honoring the driver's current rate of pay and the seniority. There would be hiring activities as needed to complete the pool required to fulfill the contract, and they'd begin training that staff. So that work would be ongoing beginning in May. There'd also be some equipment transition needed, portable lifts purchased. We have a new fleet delivery that we'll be working with the providers on, delivering new fleet to the next provider, as well as transitioning the current fleet that would transition beginning the weekend prior to October 1st. There is a procurement and installation of a dispatch system, a couple reservation systems that would take place as well. But otherwise, the transit team has the support for the equipment needed to provide the reservations and the phones, et cetera, and dispatch. As far as agency support and our concern and attention to mitigating change for our customers and our agencies. I mentioned we have met with all the affected agencies, both the ones coming onto the new contract as well as ones moving off. I've also worked with Leading Age Minnesota that can help facilitate some transition for about 8 or 9 of our agencies, and so I'll be meeting with them this Thursday. So we're very attentive to mitigating the change, but again, there will be change regardless. Transit team currently provides service to 4 of the agencies that are in part of this contract within the demand system. So change is foremost in our mind, and we'll be getting that in May and all the way through the beginning of the contract. From a customer service standpoint, individual routings and standing orders will be analyzed and optimized. And again, would have one-by-one customer and stakeholder communications. We really want the agencies to help lead us on that transition plan of what that should look like, and we will certainly meet their needs. So then we go to the action requested, that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract with Transit Team to provide the Metro Mobility Agency service from October 1st, 2018 to June 30, 2023, with an option for 1 additional year in an amount not to exceed $31,819,812.80. And with that, I'll stand for more questions.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I want to reiterate, we are a public agency, and as a public agency, we are changing a contract, and that contract is going to impact people's lives. It's going to impact our customers, and it's also going to impact the workers who are not going to be within this contract. So it brings mind to it brings question as to, what is a reasonable proposal? If we are going to lose a certain amount of people's ability to have a living wage and to provide for their families, how reasonable is this proposal? And so it would help me if you define what a reasonable proposal is.
Madam Chair, Council Member, I don't know. A reasonable proposal is one that complied with the evaluation criteria, looking at quality, qualifications, experience, and price. It was a compilation of all of those factors. And a reasonable proposal addressed the $16 driver wage that was asked for and required. I think the other questions are rhetorical, but what the evaluation panel was looking for was compliance with the evaluation criteria and ensuring that the proposal addressed the $16 wage to the driver.
I just want to clarify something. Regardless of if we were not changing companies with this contract, 57% of our riders would be impacted. There will be disruption for 57% of our riders because of this change in the geography that we are doing to be compliant with the federal regulations, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Dorfman.
And kind of following up, I just want to make sure I'm clear about this. The rationale for issuing this RFP in the first place was because of the change in federal regulations.
Well, the current contract expires.
And expired.
Right. And when we're looking at what would need to be the scope of services for the next contract, it was clear that the FTA had a mandate that we must, by law, prioritize ADA service over non-ADA service. So the current construct of the agency service is not compliant with that mandate, and they would be looking for us to change, and this contract does do that.
Okay.
Councilmember McCarthy, did you have a follow-up?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, I used the wrong terminology, responsible proposal. So just want to clarify that.
Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, a $31 million contract is a really big deal for us, a really big deal for our customers. Christine, the last chunk of your presentation, what I interpreted from that is that supporting this would mean the layoff of 50 drivers, if only 50% could transition. Is that correct?
Christine?
No, I'd like to clarify what was in the proposal, and I believe what Mr. Richter spoke to as well at last week's meeting. It is not a minimum or a maximum. It was an estimate that based on past transitions that at least 50% of employees would want to move with the new contract, but that there would be an effort to recruit as many as they're able, and that they would offer with that to qualified drivers that do want to move over an honoring of their current wage scale, their seniority.
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, we could also add that as the first transit, what they have 50% of the market, those current contracts that they have that they'll continue are growing contracts, and also they all have driver turnover. So it's hard for any provider to know if a driver would choose to go to the demand contract or choose to stay on the agency contract and apply for this other. So I think the providers, and there was 3 providers, the other one talked about transition too, but past experience about how many may want to switch companies went into some of those comments. But First Transit, because they have these other contracts with us that are growing and have turnover, there's many opportunities on those that these drivers are qualified for too. So that's some of what we read into the proposals.
Councilmember Munt.
So, Madam Chair, 2 follow-ups. So what I'm hearing is it's possible that as many as 100 could be hired if they chose to?
Correct.
Okay. So 100 could be hired if they chose to go to work for transit team. And secondly, if they chose to do that, their wages would be honored. Would their benefits also be honored?
I don't know that I can speak for the provider and how they would administer the wages and benefits exactly for their employees. They are the provider's employees, but and I don't recall right now if they introduced the benefit discussion, but they did introduce the wages, the seniority, and the current rate of pay and the seniority.
Can I just clarify something that I heard too? and then I'll get back to Councilmember Munn, and I know Councilmember Reynoso is waiting. What I heard was that due to the demand and that Metmo is growing with both contracts, that there may or may not be layoffs. I mean, that both First Transit could retain some drivers and Transit Team could hire some drivers. So it's hard for us to quantify that, but it is fact that there is a driver shortage still in this region. So that's what I heard.
That is correct. And if I'd say that, the panel was looking at whether or not the providers had a plan to successfully hire and retain the drivers that were needed to fulfill this contract. And it was the panel's estimation that Transit Team did indeed have that reasonable plan to do so.
Councilmember Mund.
Madam Chair, I think all of us, including our customers, agree that continuity of drivers is really important. And to me, two ways to do that is to pay people fair compensation and to make sure that they have good health insurance, because if they can prevent sickness, then they're going to be on the job every day for the customers who depend on them. So for me, it's not just about honoring their pay, it's also honoring the benefits that keep them on the job and healthy.
Councilmember Reynoso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Jody, I was in obviously earlier today reviewing the procurement. Was the procurement based off the current drivers that the contract calls for, the 100 drivers?
So the scope of work had current size to the current contract, and it would estimate about 98 drivers needed to perform the new contract.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Madam Chair, so what happens, since this is just a proposal, so what happens if, they come back and say, oh, it actually costs more than what we had proposed for? So what, do they come back and we just apply that amount to them? Do we just give it to them, the difference? Or do they have to prove what's changed? I mean, what is the process for that?
Madam Chair, committee member, their proposal is based on their information specific to their company, and we expect them to comply with whatever they have proposed.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Okay, expect is not a confirmation that they have to. So if you can expand on that a little bit. Let's say they say, as First Transit mentioned, there's deadhead. They didn't apply the deadhead cost in there. Or the route was, they claimed that the route was by zip code, and therefore you have 3 miles difference. So let's say they come back, Transit Team comes back and says, well, yes, it was incorrect, or we didn't apply it properly because we did not know those physical address, which is reasonable, and so therefore it will cost more. I mean, what does it mean that we will expect them to, can you just please expand on that?
Sure. Madam Chair, Council Member, I'm not an expert in the business, so you can probably tell that from my answer. That would go to the business unit. Christine's the project manager, and the project manager would work with the vendor to look at what they proposed, and if there were significant changes to what was happening, to what we told them in the RFP, that could be something that's considered. So I'm just going to defer to Christine to answer the rest. Yeah, I'll just say that, we went through a pretty decent amount of analysis to define the requirements, and we gave as much information as we could within the data privacy. We couldn't provide addresses, but zip codes, trip counts, numbers of passengers, ambulatory, non-ambulatory, using about 2 weeks set of data in November for all of the agencies that are in this scope of work. And so we also have been doing this kind of service for over 20 years, and we have a good sense of the kind of information that is needed in a RFP in order for a proposer to give an accurate bid, and we feel we did so in this case.
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, Council members, I could give some examples of how we've modified Metro Mobility. Last October, we implemented a wage increase, so we had to make changes there. We have proposals in the legislature this year that would change our service area to add some communities. We'd have to renegotiate contracts because that was not part of it. And, if you look at this map, if there was something the that would affect which agencies are receiving state funds to even operate. If there was some dramatic change in the agencies, we would have to, over what we proposed in the future, which is a possibility. These are agencies that receive funding through the state and federal sources. If that were to dramatically change, there'd be a material change, or I don't know if I want to use that term, but be a major change for what we put out in the RFP. So we may say we've changed the conditions too. We've had examples of that by things like wage increases and service changes. So there could be chances, things like that occur over a 5-year contract.
Councilmember McCarthy.
So Nick, has any provider ever come to us and say, not due to our changes, but have they ever come back in the past and request more money?
Madam Chair, members, I think the most recent one was the wage increases, that they were having a very hard time getting drivers, and they came to us, and we saw it too. We saw the performance. They were being both providers were being penalized for not meeting targets, and part of that is they couldn't find drivers. And so, though we brought the proposal forward to you, that's an example of them saying they were having a hard time under what they had proposed of hiring and retaining drivers because the wage in the marketplace had changed so much. And so I don't know if that would necessarily be the providers coming back to us or us recognizing it and carrying forward and bringing it to this council, the fact that our drivers' wages needed to be increased in order to meet performance targets on our requirements for performance targets. So I guess that was a little example of both ways. And they weren't able to hire drivers. We recognized it and made a solution that I think has worked effectively in that case, but we applied it to everybody, not just one contract in that case.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say I'm very confident in our staff's analysis of this, and I've gotten very familiar with Metro Mobility and its service over the last few months, as you all have heard a lot about. And I will say, just looking at the changing structure of how you've built the agency system and shifting things to demand service, I think makes a lot of sense. It shows a lot of efficiency. It's well thought out. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to move this item.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Reynoso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As many of you know that I've struggled with this issue, and I'm a trade unionist. I strongly believe in speaking out for workers, and quite frankly, the way I see this is a definite negative for workers. I can't sit by and not say anything. I've been asked to not say anything today, but I can't do that. I believe that workers matter. I believe that the men and women that drive for Metro Mobility should be respected. And when you see a difference on the final procurement, the difference of $5.7 million and 3/4 of that is on the back of workers, I cannot sit back and let that go without saying something. I'm going to abstain from voting because I know I can count. I can clearly see that I don't have the votes today. But every single one of you that vote for this, know that that's what you're voting for. Vote for cut in pay, cut in benefits. And I'd like to ask for a roll call vote, Madam Chair.
Okay. Ask for a roll call vote. It's not debatable. Are there any objections to that? Okay. Are there any further comments? Councilmember Dorfman.
This is a hard vote to take for a number of the reasons that have been elicited, but from what I'm hearing, there seemed to be nothing improper about the procurement process. It seemed to have integrity. This is a change like this is a disruption for certainly our customers and the employees, and it has to be, that transition has to be done really carefully to try to minimize to the extent we can that disruption for both. And from what I hear in terms of the need within the system and the just regular sort of employee movement within the system, even though there are lots of longtime transit drivers, I'm not hearing that 50 people are going to get fired. And obviously, they go through, but there's every reason to think that at the end of this, everybody still has a job. because there's a huge need within the system for more drivers. And so I don't see any reason. And while I don't often vote for a non-union shop over a union shop in my history of voting, we don't have that option in terms of something we can consider in looking at this today. So I'm going to support this.
Are there any other comments? Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, one of the reasons that I'm so proud to be on this council is because Metro Transit treats its drivers with dignity and respect. We have made the job of being a bus driver a career and not just a job, and we compensate people so that they can spend an entire career here. I think that matters. It matters to our drivers. And whenever we put out procurements, it is my hope that we will lift the standards of the entire industry to the level that we have achieved at Metro Transit. Because of that, I will be voting no today.
Are there any other comments? Councilmember McCarthy.
I understand and I have confidence in our staff and the whole procurement process. I do again have an issue with ensuring that any changes that we do will impact those who do the work for us, in the least possible way. And it is responsible for us as an agency to minimize again those impacts and to assure that that we take in consideration not only our customers' continuity and impact, but also those of the employees who provide our customers or who support or provide whatever it is that our customers need. And so I would hope that that transit team would really take in consideration the fact that the current drivers right now have a really great reputation with the customers, and that they consider this when they're going through this process and accept these drivers and at least give them the opportunity to work for you and then give them that probationary period in order for you as a provider, as a company, to determine whether or not those drivers meet the standards that you present to us and the standards that we and the customers expect from us. And so this is a very difficult decision for me. However, I really need to focus, and since since transit team can't speak or is unable to speak to us right now as to which direction they're going to go, other than that they will at least hire 50%, I will be voting no today because I want to ensure that moving forward that we take this in consideration.
Thank you. Are there any further statements? I just want to conclude by saying the flip side of this is that we have two very good firms that we have a long history with providing this service. We know from past performance and a recent audit that these firms are doing good work in providing this service and that transit team is paying their workers well. So I have confidence that we had a very good procurement. It was comprehensive and that we considered criteria that mattered to our customers and providing good service to our customers. It was clearly laid out, it was competitive, and it was fairly administered. I also believe that the staff recommendation to award to the contracted transit team represents the best service and value for our customers and our region. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our customers in our region. And I believe there is a clear choice here, and so I am supporting the staff's recommendation. And with that, we can have a roll call vote.
Councilmember Reynoso?
Pass.
Councilmember Dorfman?
Aye.
Councilmember Latowski?
Aye.
Councilmember Barber?
Aye.
Councilmember Schreiber?
Aye.
Councilmember Munt?
No.
Councilmember Elkins?
Aye.
Councilmember McCarthy?
No.
Chair Rodriguez?
Aye. Thank you, and thank you for
I
the.
abstain.
Yeah.
I passed the first time.
Yeah, we got it. Thank you. Thank you for the good discussion. And now we got to move on, and I got to see what the next business item is. Next up is 2018-96. It's the amendment to the Orange Line, and I understand we have a presentation on 2018, 96, 97, and 98, and Charles Carson is here.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Very, very brief presentation. These are three items that are all interrelated within the same group of items. Overall, the Orange Line project remains on target. Tonight before us is a request to authorize funds, activating the committed funds shown in orange here by approving three different agreements with our county funding partners. These funds will be used as part of the 2018 scope of the project, continuing to make construction payments to MnDOT as the project continues. The specific items relate to, in item 2018-96, amending a former CTIP agreement that would continue, that has been assumed by Hennepin County, continuing those funds and expanding the amounts for 2018. Amending a agreement with the Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority that would authorize $2.15 million by amending the existing agreement. And then finally, a new agreement with Dakota County Regional Rail Authority authorizing $1.4 million for 2018 construction work. So these funds would be used for the Orange Line project, and the counties approved each of them, all of these actions on March 27th. Madam Chair, I thought I might just read off the proposed action for the items, and we could take action at each of those. So for item 96, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment 2 to Agreement 16I-092 with Hennepin County, increasing participation from $8 million to $14.45 million and extending the grant period to December 31st of 2018.
Are there any questions?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We still have quorum, right? 2, 4. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
I have to leave in a few minutes.
Okay.
Item 2018-97 is the council authorizes the regional administrator to execute Amendment 1 to Agreement 16I-013 with Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority, increasing by $2.15 million and extending the term as well.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
And finally, Madam Chair, 2018-98 with Dakota County Regional Railroad Authority, an agreement to negotiate and execute this agreement with the expected value of $1.4 million.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. And Adam Harrington is here to present on I-35W and 94 funds for transit.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to present a business item to receive funding from MnDOT for support of additional service that would be provided during the 35W at 94 Crosstown down to the Crosstown construction project. And this map illustrates a number of the segments that will be under construction this year and some of the key features that we're going to be looking at over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And of course, we already heard about Orange Line and all the improvements that are going to be the result of this project in the end. And this is just a snapshot of some of the major timeframe construction that's going to be happening. So we are going to be adding additional service to a number of these routes shown on the map, and primarily into downtown Minneapolis, where Highway 65 uses those ramps into downtown. And we'll be improving all of these services and using these detour routings into downtown Minneapolis. And so this funding will help support that service. This is a one-year agreement that's extendable with MnDOT, where they would provide the council $3 million, and that the council will develop and execute an agreement with Minnesota Valley Transit Authority for $1.1 million for funds supporting additional service during the construction project. The primary item is to execute an agreement 181023 with MnDOT to receive $3 million for support of increased transit service during this project. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion? Councilmember Dorfman.
Move approval, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you to MnDOT again.
Thank you.
Next up is the budget amendment. Heather Augustin Huebner and Ed Petrie are here.
Good afternoon,
Thank
Chair,
you.
committee members at Petrie Metro Transit.
Heather Augustin Huebner, MTS.
We're here to present this first quarter capital and operating amendment. We'll go through the capital items first. I'll go through Metro Transit, then turn it over to Heather for MTS. Take questions, then we'll move on to the operating portion. The amendment this evening for Metro Transit, the material portion of the amendment is in the increased authorization for increasing on projects. Projects that we're bringing forward this evening were included in the CIP that the council adopted in December. Funding is now available, so we're now bringing those projects forward. Some of the larger projects that we are recommending this evening, first of all, it would be on the Southwest Light Rail project, recognizing $2.7 million in Hennepin County funding and $3.4 million of HICRA funding. This is a result of the CTID dissolution. It's now transferring over to Hennepin County and HICRA. We're bringing those funds in. We also have some projects for building and energy enhancements. We have the Metro Blue Line vehicles, the third installment that we'll be paying on those option vehicles. Funding for support facilities. The D line recommending bringing in $2.1 million of federal and $530,000 of RTC for engineering on D line stations and for staff time. And we have some funds in here for IS capital upgrades and enhancements. Total for Metro Transit is it's increasing our authorized 2018 program by $14.8 million and increasing our multi-year authorization by $15.7 million. And for that, Chair and committee members, that was my speed through it. And for any questions on the Metro Transit portion of the capital.
Well done. Are there any questions? If not, Heather, you want to take us through MTS?
Sure. The MTS portion is fairly small. We are not requesting an increase to our capital budget, but we are closing 5 projects. Remaining funds will be reprogrammed onto projects in the existing CIP. We're also having a number of administrative adjustments. Technology for small buses, putting on some signage for the Metro Red Line, and we're also moving some money from the suburban provider undesignated projects to specific projects that they've identified. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
We have the operating portion first.
Oh, sorry.
The operating, yeah.
My apologies.
Will I proceed? Okay, the operating portion, Heather and I both have a portion on the operating piece. On the Metro Transit portion, we're recognizing on the operating budget an increase in revenues of $1.9 million and an adjustment in our expenses of $8 million. On the revenue side, it's the $1.9 million of funding that Mr. Harrington just talked about with MnDOT for I-35W. We're recognizing bringing that $1.9 million in. And on the expense adjustment side, we have an $8 million adjustment to our expenses due to some continued sustainable cost savings that Metro Transit has been implementing since 2017. Going to continue implementing those moving forward. And also the biggest piece is fully funding of our post-retirement liability. If you recall, the council had a major post-retirement liability. We are now fully funded. We had that in our 2018 budget. Our funding or our liability is maintaining its funding status, so we don't need to fund that in 2018. So with that, Madam Chair, committee members, I would stand for any questions on the Metro Transit portion of the operating.
Are there any questions? Go ahead.
And on the MTS side, we're requesting to bring in $1.1 million of revenue and expenses, and it's part of the funds through MnDOT. The funds coming into MTS will be passed through to MBTA, connected to the item that Adam Harrington just presented.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Is there a motion?
I will move the motion, Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
We still have 5.
Did we have a quorum?
Mary Sue Abel is here to present on the Metro Transit Blue Line Extension Capital Grant Agreements with Hennepin County.
All right, I will make this really quick. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm here today to seek your approval to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute 2 amendments. One will be Amendment 2 to the 2017 Capital Grant Agreement with CTIB, and the other is Amendment 1 to our cooperative funding agreement for the engineering phase with HICRA. Previously, we did extend the CTIB agreement, which has been assigned to Hennepin County with the CTIB dissolution, to April 30th, 2018. So both of these agreements are currently set to expire on April 30th, 2018, and the proposal is to extend both of them to September 30th of 2018. There are no new dollars associated with these amendments. So with that, I will answer any questions.
I move adoption, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And our final item is the recommended D-Line station plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Scott Chinoyak, Senior Planner at the Metro Transit BRT Small Service Project Office, here with Katie Roth, Manager of the Arturo BRT program. I'll keep this brief. We're here to bring a proposed action to the council here related to the D-Line recommended station plan. This proposed action is to authorize the release of the recommended D-Line station plan for public review and comment, and to direct staff to collect comments through Friday, June 8th, 2018, summarize comments, and report the findings to the Metropolitan Council. As a brief overview, we released a draft version of the plan in February. We had a 30-day comment period into March. This recommended plan reflects comments we received and staff review and analysis of those comments. I just want to highlight the major revisions in this recommended plan, of which there are 3. We have 3 new station additions within this recommended plan compared to the draft plan. Those are at 7th and Bryant, 7th Street and Bryant in near North and North Minneapolis, Chicago and 48th Street in South Minneapolis, and Portland and 70th Street in the city of Ridgefield. So 3 major revisions from the draft to the recommended plan. So just to repeat, the proposed action 2018-105 to authorize the release of the recommended D-Line station plan for public review and comment, and to direct staff to collect public comments through Friday, June 8th, 2018, summarize comments, and report the findings to the Metropolitan Council. With that, we can stand for questions.
Councilmember Latowski.
Thank you so much. I want to thank staff for adding that 48th and Chicago stop. That's the one that I was hearing the most about from stakeholders. I'm sure the other 2 are really important too. But was hearing mainly from the city of Minneapolis and the council member of that area that was an important one. So thanks for doing that. And if there aren't any other questions, can I make the motion to send it out for public comment?
Make the motion. It's your baby.
Yeah.
Do we have a
Second.
motion and second, and then further discussion? Councilmember McCarthy.
You know, do we have a proposal on how these new stations are going to look like, or what it's going to incorporate? Or are we just, I mean, in the past, I don't remember that. Are we just moving that these are the stations that we're going to add?
Yeah, Madam Chair, council members, briefly, this plan really focuses on station locations at that intersection and corner level of where platforms will be built. The stations and platforms will be comparable to what's seen on the A-line, but in terms of what this plan itself proposes is more at the scale of intersections and corners, and not so much at the scale of feet and inches and exactly what a platform would look like on the street.
And I know we're trying to go at record speed because we're over on time, and I know it is in the document, which was really nicely laid out, that you could go look at the decision, and I did look at the decision on Chicago and 48th. But if you could just briefly discuss the 3 added stations and why they were added.
Yes, Madam Chair, council members, briefly, those 3 stations, for all 3, we did receive comments of support to add those stations in. That prompted us to take a look at, if we add those in, does it maintain our balance of speed and versus access? And we feel it does provide that balance. Briefly on those 3, some other considerations included at 7th Street and Bryant, walking conditions helped kind of prompt a closer look at an additional station. Chicago and 48th Street was at proximity to the commercial node. And then at Portland and 70th Street, one thing we did was take a step back and look at long-term, what could that local versus rapid service mix look like that warranted and helped support an additional station at Portland and 70th. So it's a brief overview of, aside from the comments of support, we received some more technical considerations.
That was like really well done. Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Oh, we have to decide what goes to on consent. Obviously, when not the agency contracts.
Where are we?
96 through 98 to be on consent for council. Can't, the next 2 cannot. And then the D line, I'm thinking, where's Kara?
She just had it. She's got to catch us.
Madam Chair,
I feel
remember, we'd have to come back to give
Oh,
the
that's
final.
true. It's just to release it to the public.
Right.
I think that could be on consent. Is the committee okay with that? Okay, otherwise we get a lot of items. So all the same week basically will be non-consent.
Right.
Okay. If there's no other business, we can be adjourned.